Welcome to Keep It Real Fridays. That was a little bit of some old school gospel go-go. I think 2012 from Wanted Band. I'm doing a rendition of Worthy is the Lamb. So, if you know me, I am a DC go-go culture type of guy. So I need a little bit of that when we start Keep It Real Fridays. And just every day in my life, I need a little bit of go-go. But I'm excited as this was our first Keep It Real Fridays episode in a couple of months. And I'm excited because I get to share in conversation this evening with a good friend of mine, good brother that I've been able to meet over the past couple of years and just really engage and do ministry with in a different way. But before I introduce him, for those of you who are tuning in and for those of you who will be watching afterwards, Keep It Real Fridays is a vision that started about 15 years ago now. It started as a youth and young adult alternative in the church. It was birthed so that there would be something for youth and young adults to do. Most churches, if you were going to church back in the 90s, early 2000s, there was still a lot of churches that all they had was youth choirs and being on an usher board as options for young people. And so what we wanted to do was provide an alternative for young people where they could come and have a safe space and worship in their own way. And so we used to have services where you would have gospel go-go, or you would have gospel rappers or poets or mime and dance and step teams and, just all the creative arts types of gifts that would just come. We would have churches from all denominations, all church sizes just come together on a Friday night. We started our first service, Pastor Ambrose, with 7 young people. And through the years, we saw it grow to as many as over 300 young people on a Friday night, worshiping and just worshiping God in their own way. And so as a pandemic has come, we've shifted to try to navigate this virtual space. And so what we do is we engage in topics that would be relevant for youth and young adults. So we try to bring different speakers that we can engage. And so tonight this evening is early afternoon for Pastor Ambrose because he's in California. But this evening we're having a conversation on Black faces and green spaces. And what does that mean, people who are listening, is that when we talk about Black spaces and green spaces, that's not something we talk about a lot in the Black church, is being able to embrace the environment. And we want to talk about the Black church and the Generation Z and the millennials and the environmental movement. And my guest today is Pastor Ambrose Carroll, who is one of the founders of Green the Church. If I had the opportunity to meet him through my full-time job at the Nature Conservancy. Some of y'all don't know where I work, so but don't be looking me up after this. But just have had the chance to meet this brother a couple years ago, and I had no idea I had the opportunity to intersect ministry with my full-time job. And a lot of people think full-time ministry, you got to go out there and pastor a church. And a lot of times when I realized how God was speaking to me, that you can find full-time ministry in your job, full-time job. And I've had the privilege to intersect my ministry with work. But I want Pastor Ambrose to introduce himself and just tell us a little bit about Green the Church, and we'll dig into a lot of the other stuff a little bit later.
Man, that's righteous. Listen, glad to be here at Keep It Real Fridays. Brother Thomas, man, bless you. I appreciate your spirit, appreciate ministry. I got to confess, that was my first time hearing gospel go go. So you got a lot to teach. I love it. I love it. You know, how as we stay relevant, scripture says, no, not the scripture, preachers like to say, a charge to keep our have a God to glorify. And then it comes down to serve this present age, our calling to fulfill. And I appreciate staying on the cutting edge of what it means to minister to the present age and everything that means. So appreciate your spirit and this endeavor. Yeah, I'm Ambrose Carroll. Listen, I pastor the church by the side of the road in Berkeley, California, and I promise that is the name and not the location. And live in Oakland. Grew up in Oakland, California. Went to school down in Miami, Atlanta for a while, and then came back home. Brought it back to the Bay. We started Green the Church. So I have two older brothers and three younger sisters. My two older brothers and one of my sisters are all clergy. We all finished from the Interdenominational Theological Center, Morehouse School of Religion in Atlanta, following the footsteps of our dad. And in '97, when my brothers completed, we started something called Carroll Ministries International to do the same thing, right? To answer the call, to talk to our generation. And we started, being a Generation Xer, right? We were all about, Malcolm X and, kind of the return to this notion of blackness. And so we decided to do something for the Black church and the Black family. And we did Christian education, a lot of revivals, and we also did a lot of family reunions around the country. My mom, is kind of the family griot that brings everybody together and kind of charts the course and has all the history. And so we kind of got into that with us and with her, and saw the history of the church, the history of the migration pattern of Black people, trying to figure out what we all had in common. In 2009, I was pastoring in Colorado and had always been interested in what would be the large social umbrella issue of our day, the way that the civil rights movement was for our four parents, and read Van Jones' book, The Green Job of the Green Collar Economy, and really felt that he had articulated for our generation kind of that big tent issue, social issue for our day. I became a Green for All fellow, began to learn, what was going on in urban and rural environments, people of color from all over the country, and poor white people, right? Just people in every facet who were experiencing environmental injustice, and really begin to pull together, looking at all of the tenets of what it meant to be an environmentalist, what it meant to be sustainable. And I noticed that there were a lot of Afrocentric folk, a lot of people who were spiritual, but not a lot of people in my cohorts that really talked about Western religion, right? They really talked about our denominations and things of that nature. And but I hung in there, and a few months later ran into an organization, Interfaith Power and Light, which was led by Sally Bingham, a strong lady out here in San Francisco, started this organization, and they were in 40 states. And I said, okay, here are my people of faith. And the largest organization, every state had chapters. People were moving, talking about the environment, even talking about environmental justice to a degree. And I found a lot of people of faith, but not a lot of people of color. And decided that we needed to bridge that gap, and decided that we really needed to, I always say, wake up the sleeping giant that is the Black church on the issues of the environment. And that's really how we got started. People were always saying, well, the Black church isn't interested in the environment, not interested in sustainability. We've got other stuff that we're worried about. We've got police brutality, right? We have people dying violent in the streets. We have quote unquote Black on Black crime. We have food issues. So we just saw the environment as something other. And we don't talk about it the same way, but in my opinion, there are a lot of things that we do, including all of those other social battles that are directly tied to the environment. And so we wanted to tell stories of where the Black church was indeed participating, not just participating, but giving leadership and things when it comes to what it means to be a good steward of the earth and a steward of one another. And that's how we got going. I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Thanks for that, Pastor Carroll. You actually touched on one of the questions I want to ask you, but before I ask you that, I want to invite those who are listening and watching that you can post comments. If you have questions, engage in the conversation. This is just not a conversation between myself and Pastor Ambrose, who want to be inclusive of something that you may be resonating with throughout this conversation, or there's questions that you have, please feel free to put them in a chat on YouTube and or Facebook. But my first question to Pastor Ambrose, and you just kind of touched upon this, because, especially right now, we've been overwhelmed, with, the court trial for George Floyd. Immediately after, it seems like almost the last couple of days, we hear about other shootings that's happened, and we constantly have to relive the trauma over and over from that, not even talking about, gentrification, not talking about just, just the racial violence and issues that we have to face on a daily basis. But like you said, the environmental stuff that affects our communities is kind of put to the back burner. And, we don't really engage in those type of conversations. But I want to ask you this. Can you speak to the issues of environmental concerns that affect our Black and Brown communities that we may not realize, that kind of tie into some of the stuff that's going on right now in society?
Yeah, man. Everything is really, really one. I think, one thing with Western thought, there's always this dualism. We have a way of separating and dividing things. On the continent, in some places, there's no different words for like sacred and secular, right? That doesn't, but we try to bifurcate stuff and really split stuff up. And I think in that, when people talk about environmental justice, we're like, what is that? We already got some other stuff. But the reality is, it's just justice, right? And so when you see the injustice afforded communities, things that we probably don't consider as much is our lived environment. Like, we take for granted where we live and stuff around us. And because we've grown up with it and become used to it, we don't necessarily see them as things that take life away. I grew up in what we call deep East Oakland, 98th and E. And I grew up in the flats. And so I didn't know that until I went to college and, found out somebody clear across country that there was a difference. But where I grew up was an industrial center. The train tracks were close that came from the shipyard, and the canneries and all those industrial businesses were on the side of town where our populations lived. And so I grew up smelling the smell of, there was a company called Granny Goose potato chips. It's a potato chip company. And I grew up smelling that smell like all the time. And I remember seeing this movie, when a guy comes out, he says, man, it's a war movie, Vietnam or something. It said, man, there's nothing like the smell of napalm in the morning. Like, that just smelled good to it. He didn't know that was going to be killing him and everybody else for the next few years. And so I say that jokingly about Granny Goose. When I came home from college, man, it was good to be home. I get back in my environment. I smell that Granny Goose. I said, boy, it's nothing like smelling Granny Goose in the morning. But Granny Goose came along with toxins and toxicities that cancer-causing agents. And many of us, it may not be Granny Goose. It may be because we're on a dump site, because we're close to the sewage, that all these things that are in our lived environment, people have made decisions for them to be there, and we don't often see it. Right here listen, we just beat back something nefarious here last night. The FDA, whoever's in control of the flight patterns, they had decided to move the planes that now fly over the hills when they come in. they want to move that to fly in over the flatlands, right? So once again, people are still making decisions about toxicities, and they look at us and say, we don't want toxicities over our large houses. Why don't you make them come in down where all the rest of the pollution is? And so those are the kind of things that are in our lived environment that bring on things like asthma, that bring on things, even when we talk about what food is in our environment, bring on things like diabetes, hypertension.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, the very last guest that I had was somebody from NIH to talk about child obesity and diabetes. So,
Yeah,
hand in hand, like you said, it all ties together.
same.
Yeah. My next question to you, Pastor Ambrose, is, this is not really a conversation in the Black church as we understand because of all these other issues. And often, one of the things, the thoughts that I love when you talk about this, you talk about green theology. And, some people may hear that and be like, what green theology? What do you mean? But in everything that we do, there's a theology tied to it. And, oftentimes maybe we don't see the theological foundation as it pertains to environmental justice. Can you start to speak to that green theology or that, ecological theology?
Yeah, for sure. I think again, because of the way we do science and the way we do life here, again, things are so divided. So when we talk about theology, which is the study of God, we talk about that along a few continuums. So to do theology, you have to talk about history, you have to talk about philosophy, and then you talk about the written word, right, or the Bible, and you look at all of those things in concert to kind of get an understanding. So when I talk about a green theology, I talk about theology that sees value in the planet itself. Many of our theologies, because the Black church has been subversive, we were really made to let go of some of our spiritual practices that, of course, are earthbound. And that could be herbs, right? How we heal ourselves, all the ancient healers, looking at plants, looking at the sacred modality of animals, right? And if we see animals as sacred, but you want to eat the animals, then you're going to take that out, right? Well, it's not sacred anymore. You're just going to say, rise, Peter, slay, and eat, right? These are the things that we decide how we think about what is divine. And so a green theology sees value in the planet, and then gives you an opportunity to relook at your own history, to relook at your own philosophy and the philosophies of individuals who have come before you. And so when we talk about green theology, it's just that. It is a theology. Somebody says theocology, right? That God has created all that is, and that there's life and the abundance of life for us as human beings on the planet itself. That juxtaposed to a more escapism type of theology that says this world is wicked and sinful and it's not going to be right. You're not going to have anything. But if you try to live right, you will die and go to heaven, and then you'll have mansions in the sky.
Awesome. So the next thing I want to get into is, going back to not really having these conversations, and a little piece of my story, Pastor Ambrose, but just to kind of share, for those who are watching, I was, at TNC really trying to figure out what's next in my journey, and had settled into my position, and somebody had come to me and said, Thomas, would you be interested in going to a faith-based conservation conference? And I said, what? I said, I was like, wow, okay. And it was being hosted by Eco America. It was in New York City, maybe about 4 years ago now. And I said, sure. And they knew I was a minister, and they thought I might have interest in it. And I was like, cool. And so, I went, overnight trip to New York. sat in this conference, and I see all these faith leaders across the
Hmm.
country, and from different denominations, different religions, and I was just like, wow. I mean, there's like 70 or 80 people in this room, and everybody's just talking about, there was no theological debate. There wasn't my religion is better than yours. It wasn't my denomination is better than yours. Everybody was there for the same purpose, the same passion about what do we do to address the concerns of climate, um, the climate and environmental justice. And from there, I learned how environmental justice was just like a product of social justice. And as we talked about all the concerns in the Black and brown communities, and I was just sitting there, I'm like, I'm 30 something years old and I've never had this conversation. Why
Hmm.
hasn't my church ever had this conversation? Um,
Yeah.
and it made so much sense as I was sitting there, and I'm like, and sitting there and listening to us talking about being better stewards of the earth. I'm like, this is basic. This is this is basic Sunday school.
Right.
From when I was a kid, but never had that conversation. And my question to you: why don't you think we have these type of conversations in a Black church? Do you think it's maybe lack of relationship with nature, or maybe nobody is really ingrained in us about nature, or what's your thoughts?
Wow, man. I think that's an excellent question. My mind went several places. I think a lot of it has to do with power. And at Green the Church, what we really want to do is empower our communities. So when you talk about, yes, our lack of connectability with nature, it's many things. I was watching a piece last night. We're talking about our national parks and why African Americans were not going to the national park. National park is kind of a free and open place, and you can go, right? But if it's 1965 and you're going to be out on, 5,000 acres worth of land, and you're going to be out there at night and it's dark, where all the white folk going to be? you know, this may not be a safe place, right? I can go, but can I really go?
Mhm.
So you talk about issues of power. A lot of us, again, the Great Migration, we came out of Alabama, Mississippi. My dad was an agriculture major, right? But he started preaching, and we got he moved to the city, and then his older brothers and their children and stuff, even if they didn't move out of the state of Louisiana, they still moved out of the country, right? Because there's a certain stigma that goes with that. There's a certain identification to slavery, to chattel slavery. There's a certain pain and trauma that
Mhm.
comes along with that. I don't think it should be ignored. And so even, when we talk about epigenetics and what's in our very DNA, that, there's a lot of trauma underlining there. You talk about that song, Strange Fruit, and people being lynched and all of those type of things. Those things are real, just as real as Oscar Grant for me in Oakland. Just they're very real, palatable places and things. And so we, like George Jefferson, we like to think of ourselves in the 80s and 90s as moving on up, right? We move away from that, and somebody else now does that, right? We are now kind of above that. So I think those are some of the pieces. And I also say, from a theological standpoint, when you really begin to talk about who's going to take care of the planet, who's going to make decisions about the health of the planet, then again, it gets into a power piece. And when we see, the big statue of white Jesus in Brazil and everywhere else, then you kind of give that power to God. And the people that look most like God have the power to take care of that.
Definitely. Well, one of the things I want to thank you for, because after that Eco America, and then when I got the opportunity to, you know, um, come to Hayward for that first conference, and just really being exposed, because it was one thing going to the Eco America conference, but then it was, going to another conference hosted by my people, to really engage me more into this. And, one of the things over the past couple of years, and I've told you, is because, I've always had a appreciation for nature growing up, but never really a relationship with nature. And, now as I'm developing more of a relationship with nature and going on walks and just thinking about, I haven't started yet, but I keep thinking about this garden that I want to plant in my own yard. And I, start to think about things like that and how I just really want to embrace this relationship with nature. It's prompted me to even go into my youth ministry at Metropolitan AME and just really start to engage our kids in the conversation. Because just because I didn't have that, personal connection, like I feel like this is something I need to make sure that our kids are talking about,
Yes.
because these are the things that they need to think about and be concerned about, especially those of us, especially in the DC area, where there's not many green spaces, but things that we need to think about and talk about. And I want to segue just sharing that as some may watch this or maybe watching right now, watch this later. We may be thinking of opportunities. Well, how do I have this conversation at my church? Or, what are some things that we could be doing to kind of maybe start to get into this space? Do you have any recommendations or thoughts for, those who, may not have had that conversation, but maybe watching this and say, that's Sunday school. So how do we
Exactly.
do this?
Yeah. So, I mean, a part of what we do and what we advocate for is that we believe every church ought to have a green team, right? If you have a praise team, a usher board, the choir, you ought to have a green team, which means 2 or 3 people who are really just paying attention and helping to kind of catalyze the movement at the church, because until it becomes a part of the culture of the church, it's really not going to move. I think the best thing to do, and again, I understand environmentalism as somebody else's language. It's not really our language, which doesn't mean that we don't do the things that environmentalists do. It's just that we don't talk that language, right? So we aren't keeping up. Most of us aren't keeping up with what Greenpeace is doing. Most of us aren't keeping up with whatever you do, trying to save whales and stuff like that. We're really not into that. But the Black church believes in revival, and I often say we are revivalist, right? And by nature, there are things that we do that are the same thing. And I think we just have to name it ourselves and understand it ourselves is good, right? If you're a church, you talk about stewardship, then you talking about green the church, because it's about taking responsibility, right? It's about taking responsibility to care for the planet and for everyone else. And so I think it's about we try to tell stories so that people can see the stuff that they already do, right? And so, if you have a church and, you've got an auntie and those that do preservatives, and sometimes they in the kitchen, they done cooked and they got some preservatives, they pass it around, you're already doing it, right? If you got a church, you got a committee that's doing some quilting, doing some intergenerational stuff, you're already doing it. The fact that we've done more with less for so long, we really have a story to tell. Many of our congregations, many churches have gardens, food gardens. Even if you are participating, a lot of us participate in food pantries. That's a good start. If your church has a food pantry, guess what? You're already in the conversation. You're already doing it, right? You don't need somebody else's language. We need to just take account of what we do that is about sustainability. So I find even, many churches still take our young people camping, right? Many congregations still take our young people to youth groups. We go to youth camp. We still go outside to the park. We go to the pumpkin patch, right? All of those things really began, if there's a green team, somebody just start taking account of the things that you really find yourself doing. There are so many congregations, because we live in these toxic areas. There's so many congregations that have purchased buildings and then found that, they did a toxicology report, right? And that the land is abused. So they end up fighting big oil or having conversations. Many of our congregations and pastors and leaders have had to deal with some of these environmental stressors. We just don't talk about it and characterize it as now we are being environmentalists. So for me, that's kind of a place where we start. And then, of course, listen, I always say we don't own a lot of skyscrapers, but we own a lot of church buildings, churches that are making sure that they're more efficient, making sure that they're looking at conservation and changing our lights. I go into a lot of churches now and go in the restroom and the lights come on all by themselves. And nobody has talked about that as environmentalism. The trustees talk about it because we got to save this money. We got to conserve, right? But again, don't take our wisdom and our modality to be stewards over what we have lightly, because it is stuff that we do. And so, part of our rationale is we want to be an organization that begins to identify that we're already in the conversation. And so people say, well, where's the Black church? Black church is not lost at all. We're doing the work. And the fact that we're not in your, the fact that we may not be in your denomination or in the place where you gather talking about it, that has more to do with the fact that we're not in places with you, which is kind of by design as well. So, yeah.
Indeed. Digging a little bit deeper, and especially into the meat of this conversation, is trying to get young people more engaged. I talked about having conversations with our young people through our youth ministry, just to start foundational just education about this. But something came across. I was scrolling through social media yesterday, and I saw a post and that somebody else reposted, and it said, do you know somebody who could use a 4-year scholarship to pursue a Bachelor of Science degree in Agricultural and Environmental Sciences at a HBCU? And they said on their post, someone I know has 25 full scholarships, tuition fees, room and board on their desk starting for this fall.
Come on here, man. Send me that.
Oh yeah, I'll send that to you. And I saw somebody post that, and I immediately reposted it. And and I thought about it, like literally 25 scholarships sitting on somebody's desk, and for young people to go to school, but we gotta help, because when you start to say agriculture and environmental science, it's not the popular thing. It's not business management. It's not per se some of the things that may be a little bit more popular, but how do we get these millennials to see these opportunities as there's spaces for them? And this might be kind of a 2-part question for you, Pastor Ambrose, but how do we get them engaged in a way to show them that, there's opportunities for you in this space to embrace this and even make a career out of it? So
there you go. Well, I mean, when you said that, my mind went back. National Baptist Convention used to do an oratorical contest every year, and we would do the oratorical contest in our churches, then to our district associations, then our state conventions, and we go on up to national, you know what I mean? And when we be able to, write essays and then things of that nature. So one thing that we want to do as Green the Church throughout all of our denominations and all of our denominational work is reinstate some of that stuff. We want to sponsor, the oratorical contest. We want to sponsor some essay writing contests that gives some cash prizes, right? That brings the conversation to the head. There are a lot of people, walking up and down the street of East Oakland with their pants sagging down. They are farmers. They just don't know it. Like farming, is really a calling, and there are people who are called to put seed in the ground. And I really think we need to really look at our history, especially as Black pastors, mostly coming from the South. The pastor in the South he preached, but he or she also farmed, right? That they also were the head of the farming thing down there. So when you go to the Hampton Ministers Conference, you went to Hampton, right, to learn farm techniques and learn preaching and singing, right? All in the same place. And this is not ancient history. This is very I'm talking about 50, 60 years back. It's not even that long ago. And so I think it's about revisiting that. It's about us being purposeful. The reality is that, that the climate is affected. And just like right now in this pandemic, I saw African-American women, scientists, who were very much a part of making sure that these vaccines came into being. That many people are called to combat what's going on with our climate, and we need our young people in STEM. We need them in science, technology, engineering, right? Agriculture, arts, and mathematics. We need young people to be about this business, because this is the business of saving their very lives. What's happening with the polar ice caps right now is problematic. I said this morning, April showers bring May flowers. And we about at the end of April in Oakland, California, in the Bay, and we haven't had any rain. And that's lovely if you want to go out on a Saturday afternoon. It's bad if you remember the smoke and the fires from the last 2 years, right? And it's getting worse. So we need our young people to fully engage. We need to get back to the basics of making sure we have our scholarship funds and things of that nature. We also need to make sure, not only for those who have an academic pursuit, right? We need those chemical engineers, but we also need to begin to prepare our young people for living wage jobs in this green space. We really need to be up on it. We need to know what's going on with the Biden administration and what's happening. And we need to be talking about those things at our district association, at when our diocese meets, right? That when we come together, this has to be a part of what we are talking about, because to a large degree, it's about our very survival. And then it's about kind of how we remain human beings in relationship with what is divine. I mean, I think it is food for our soul, for our spirit.
Yeah, when you responded to that just now, Pastor Ambrose, it reminded me of some months ago. I was on a call with the Nature Conservancy, and I forgot what the call was about, but I remember one of the my colleagues in another state jumped on, young African American colleague, and I believe in her 20s, and to learn that she was a scientist in the organization.
Wow.
And I got so excited, and I had to, before we ended the call, I wanted to tell her I was excited because I never had met a Black scientist, and she kind of smiled, and but I was serious because I was just like, to see, a Black woman in that role, and I just had to, to praise God about it, and just, I wanted to hear more about her journey, and because, it's times like those we have to celebrate those moments, just to see us, enter into spaces where, we're not normally in at times. So thank you for that. I want to ask you this last question, and I want, after that, I want you to kind of share how we can get more involved and with Greener Church, or get connected. And this question is a little off script. I think about, and I think it was last year when we heard about the young Black man that was in the park. I believe it was in New York.
Oh,
And
yeah.
he got approached about the white woman, and basically she called the police on him for being in the green space. And going back to the title of this conversation, Black Faces in Green Spaces. And of course we know that it was an unfortunate situation, and just adds to that trauma. But I want to ask you this, Pastor Ambrose: what would with the work that you're doing, the work that you're pushing forward, the education that you're trying to share with Black churches across our country? I've been with you in Oakland. I've been with you in St. Louis. We've been working with Chicago doing this work, and hopefully DC, New York, and whomever else wants to jump in this movement in the near future. But what would you like to see happen in the next 5 to 10 years? What's something that you dream about through the change, through the work that you do? Is it the access? Is it, to, more of these green spaces? Is it something else in particular? Is there something that you dream about as you think about this work that you do, that you would like to see influenced by the work that you do?
Wow. I mean, I think for me, I mean, this may be a bit esoteric. I mean, for me, I want to see I want to see our people empowered. I want to see, like, there's a degree of there's a book written, and I have not read it, but I like the title. It's called Woke Church. Right, I have it right. I really want to see us wake up to the reality of who we really are as a people on this planet, and not in a selfish way, not simply for us, as a nation against other nations. That's not what I'm talking about. I want to see us come together and know ourselves and know our power, and the need for us to be a part of holding this planet in balance. And I want us to do that in a way that allows other people groups to understand who they are and for people to see their humanity. I often say that everything that I do is about bringing forward the beloved community, and I think I think that this is part and partial, in a way that the world, because of because of a capitalistic system that is built in large part on black racism or anti-black racism, and other races in between, we are living in a way that's just off balance. We are taking too much, as if there's always going to be enough, and we're doing it to our own demise. And so, yeah, so for me, there are places, that I would like, that we have to flourish. We have to get back connected to the land, right? So we have to be found in the parks. We, if not for us and the Buffalo Soldiers, the parks wouldn't even be accessible as they are. To know that we are so much a part of the fiber, not just of this nation, but the fiber of us as earthlings. You know what I mean? And so again, probably a bit lofty, something you probably can't get a data count on, but the work that we're doing, that others are doing as well, is work to help bring about the beloved community on this planet.
All right. As we close out this conversation, as a basketball coach, it would only be right for me to bring a basketball reference into this. So I'm sitting back and I'm listening to this conversation. I'm pretending I'm a viewer, and I'm like, wow, this really interests me. I'm sitting on the sidelines, and I'm sitting back and I'm yelling, "Put me in the game, coach." So how can people get more involved with Greener Church, and what does Greener Church have going on that people can connect themselves to and to educate themselves?
Thank you so much, man. You talked about basketball coach. I thought you was gonna make me run lines. Let's start blowing that whistle. Yeah, man. So Greener Church. First and foremost, please check us out, www.greenthechurch.org. We constantly put out content. We have a newsletter that goes out every month that tells you what Black congregations are doing in all facets. So we do, our pillars are to amplify green theology, to promote sustainable practices, and to build power for political and economic change. So we have Black churches that are taking, going out to the national parks. We've got Black churches that are doing renewable energy, building efficiency, food sovereignty, the whole nine. And we're telling that story. So please sign up, get the newsletters, make sure you're on our list. We do an open free webinar every other month, large scale, where we bring in individuals in all of those strands, having conversations with the Black church and with people who are large players in the environmental movement. So we're bringing it together. You can come and be a part of that. And then we invite you to, become a member of Greener Church for as low as $10 or a year, or $10 a month. You can come on in and get you a membership card. I feel everybody ought to have a membership card for Green the Church like you do for the NAACP. We need an environmental movement. Green the Church is the largest environmental organization for and by the Black church. And nobody else is going to kind of pay for our revolution. So we need your help and we need your support. We also have online courses. We've got our first course out. It's called The Black Church and the Environmental Age. You can definitely cop that. And then earnestly right now, we are pulling in congregations. We have an ambassadors program where if you're interested in doing this work, as Thomas said, you know, some of us think if you're going into ministry, you have to be a pastor. But I learned that that's not the case. You got chaplains, you got nurses, you got Army chaplains, you have people who are doing environmental ministry, like Brother Michael Malcolm. There's plenty of room in this game. And if God is calling you to be a steward of the planet and God is calling you to ministry, we want to help you find your way. You are a champion to us and we want to walk with you. So we have an ambassadors program, and then we have an ambassador congregation program. And I'm talking to pastors all around the country to come on in and join us so that the pastor and two other individuals, it could be your social justice pastor, your youth pastor, it could be the little old lady that sit on the third row, but she down. So 3 individuals from the congregation to start your green team and come on and be an ambassador congregation. So we definitely need your support. We are, really fighting for the Green New Deal. We're fighting legislation nationally and locally. And come on out and be a part of the fight. Come on out and join us. www.greenthechurch.org. Thank you, man.
Yeah, and definitely I just want to plug the work too that, just been done. Just the Nature Conservancy and just the summit that was last year in St. Louis, and just, being there on the ground with you all in St. Louis and just seeing face to face and just, the pastors there doing the work and just seeing people come together. And that was such an amazing summit. And, just even the upcoming work, in Chicago with the Nature Conservancy and Pastor Moss Church, which Trinity United Church of Christ. And that's something that, people can also look out for, especially for, those of you who are my friends in Chicago. Definitely something that to look out for and see how to get connected. And even DC, as I shared with you, small world, somebody connected me to Pastor Kip Banks. And, I mentioned your name. I said, Pastor Ambrose Carroll. And he said, that's my friend.
That's my man.
I just talked to him last week and I was just like, small world. So this environmental work is happening all over the place. So we invite you to plug in to greenthechurch.org and get connected, get involved. So Pastor Ambrose, go ahead, jump in.
Yeah, really quick. Definitely want to stress that in October 10th, 11th, and 12th, I believe we're going to have our next Green the Church Summit. This year, it will be virtual. So we won't be on the ground in Chicago, but Chicago is still our main sponsor and working with the Nature Conservancy and other organizations. But wherever you are in the country, look out for that. And it's really going to be a mastermind. So we're looking for 100 African-American churches to be here. We're going to do some real work. We're going to roll up our sleeves, try to get in front of, again, a lot of legislation is coming down, Energy Department, USDA, other entities. And we want to make sure that the Black church shows up together and very present. So please, man, please, sir, DC, Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, y'all come on in. It's going to be a great time.
Awesome. I wanted to post this comment by a new friend of mine I just met, Latoya Archibald, who says that she previously worked in the environmental justice movement, and I look forward to having a conversation with her in the upcoming days. But definitely, she says God is calling all of us to steward this planet. So definitely, thank you, Latoya, for that comment. Thank you, Pastor Ambrose. We're looking forward to what's coming down the pike in October. I want to repeat that again. He's looking for 100 churches.
That's right.
100 churches, at least 100 churches,
at least
to get connected with the Greener Church Summit. That's going to be virtual. You had no excuse. You don't got to buy a plane ticket to Chicago. You don't
Preach
have
now.
to drive 2 or 3 hours away to Chicago. All you got to do is set aside those days in October, log in virtually, get plugged in. And definitely this is opportunity. And especially for those who've been asking me, about this whole green the church and greening
Let's
the
go.
environment, all of those that have been texting me and calling me. I know y'all gonna watch this. I want y'all to get plugged in and get your churches involved. So thank you, Pastor Ambrose. This has been a blessing. I appreciate you and all the work that you do. And I look forward to continue to just be a supporter and work along by your side and see this great work of your mission done. Thank you so much, Pastor Ambrose.
Bless you, sir. Blessings on your audience and on your ministry. Blessings.
All right. So for those of you who are tuning in, we will do another Keep It Real Friday next Friday. My special guest will be another good friend of mine named Brooke Waller. She is going to talk about how to deal with trauma in the workplace and talk about her testimony of how she had to navigate trauma in the workplace and how she's now become a career strategist for those who are trying to navigate working through difficult situations. And she'll also be talking a little bit about that. And this is especially specific for our millennials who are trying to navigate their career and trying to work through maybe difficult work environment or navigate spaces that may be new and familiar to them. So we invite you to invite a millennial to tune in next week to hear Miss Brooke Waller in a conversation that I have with her next week. So thank you again, Pastor Ambrose. God bless everybody that tuned in, and God bless those who will watch this afterwards. Thank you. Love you all, and we will see you on next Friday.